Women of Welcome. This is like our third attempt to try and get this right. We are going to be talking about law enforcement, immigration enforcement in your area. And what are the concerns that a lot of you have written in, a lot of the questions you have, who are all the players, who has what rights, how do we approach, how do we engage, all of it. So we're going to invite two people on. Here's one that I see, and then I'm going to invite one other person. I can see her. I don't see her on just yet. There's Elizabeth. Okay, this one worked. Now we have to get Jennie on, one more person. So hang with us real quick here, folks. Let's see. I've got it. There we go. Okay, this might work. Everyone cross your fingers because this is incredibly important. Oh, here we go. This is wonderful. Okay. Sorry, we've been trying this for a couple minutes now, so this is going to be great. Okay. I'm super excited to have this conversation because it's been a long time coming, and there have been a lot of questions in our community about law enforcement. And I'm just telling you, we've got two incredible ladies who are going to help us think through this really well today, which is great. So first and foremost, I want to introduce you to Jennie Murray, who is the president and CEO of the National Immigration Forum. They are a founding partner of Women of Welcome. And if you don't know about the Forum is a nonprofit out of DC that advocates for better immigration policies that uphold the rule of law and also the tradition of American welcome towards immigrants and refugees. And then Elizabeth Neumann here is, I don't know if she's on your left, she's on my left, is a national security expert and violence prevention advocate who has worked under 3 presidential administrations. So she worked for George W. Bush, for Obama, and the first Trump administration, leading and advising the White House on matters of national security. So we have kind of a stacked content situation coming your way. So what we want to do is we want to get through a whole host of questions that some of you have been sending into our email, some of you have been asking in our private Facebook group, or just have comments on frequently in some of the content that we have. So we are going to talk about in this live together, who are all the players in the enforcement that's happening in our cities across the country? What is the tension that exists? Are there agreements that exist? What is everybody's role to play? What are some of the rights that we have versus the law enforcement agents have? And so we want to address all of these things, and we want to do so in a nonpartisan and hopefully simplistic way so that everybody comes away with something that's more helpful for them when they engage in conversations about what's happening around the country. So ladies, thank you for being with us. I'm going to start with Elizabeth Neumann. And what I'd love for you to do is just give us a landscape of who is everybody involved. I mean, we're hearing all these acronyms, ICE, CBP, BP, local PD, sheriff's, like, give us who are the enforcement agencies that are involved at this moment at any given time in a community doing immigration enforcement?
Okay, so within ICE, you have 2 components. ICE stands for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, and ICE didn't exist until the Homeland Security Act, but its component organizations existed and go back decades, in some cases centuries. So there's an element of who ICE is that is brand kind of new, 20-ish years old, and but the legacy authorities, legacy agency experiences go back a long time. The 2 components of ICE are the Enforcement and Removal Operations, ERO, and the Homeland Security Investigations, HSI. ERO has civil immigration law capabilities, so civil enforcement. One of the things that often happens in our political rhetoric is that we hear the administration talking about illegal aliens and that they are enforcing, they're looking to enforce the law and remove people who are criminal illegal aliens. Criminal in most of our minds means that they have done something that violates U.S. criminal law, right? Like that's what the criminal means. So hurting someone, stealing something, those are crimes. The administration sometimes blurs the lines and will say, well, if you came into the country illegally or overstayed your visa, that is a crime. And while it is true to say that is illegal, it's actually a civil law that has been violated, not a criminal law. So when you violate immigration law, it is civil. You're still breaking the law, but it's not the same as committing a federal criminal. So why is that important? I think it's important because I'm not suggesting that breaking our civil laws is bad, but there is a difference between the things that are criminal and things that are civil. And the administration tries to just blur all that together. They basically are making this argument that, well, we are deporting all criminals because they broke our immigration laws. And you're like, well, that's not what you said on the campaign trail. And that's not what you're implying when you're saying you're going after hardened criminals, and all the examples you give are gangs and this person murdered somebody. And in fact, some of the organizations that are doing statistics around who has been arrested and detained and deported, the percentage that's actually criminal is very, very small. So why does that matter with these agencies? Enforcement and removal operations is supposed to focus on immigration arrest, detention, and deportation. They enforce civil immigration law, civil, visa overstays, that kind of stuff. Homeland Security investigations is more like the FBI. In fact, when I was in government, we, during my tenure, and I don't know if this is still the case, they were prosecuting more terrorism cases than the FBI because of their law, their authority. They have this really fascinating set of authorities that the FBI doesn't even have. So it's a really important tool that we use for national security cases. They specialize in things like human trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering, child exploitation, all sorts of really cool stuff that they have the capability to do. Those are crimes that they are responsible for investigating and then working with prosecutors to take bad people off the street. When we're talking about ICE enforcement to deport, what we should be talking about is enforcement and removal operations. That is their mission, and they have a way that they go about it. Sometimes they ask HSI for help, especially if who they are targeting enforcement is truly a criminal. But generally speaking, most types of activity aren't against hardened. If they're not against hardened criminals, you don't need all the manpower, all the firepower if you're doing it appropriately. What has happened in this administration is there's been a focus on, yes, removing people that have committed crimes, but they've also been very open about the fact that they have a quota. They're trying to, their goal last year was in the first year of the administration to deport 1 million people. They claim they've deported about 600-ish thousand. Outside groups are saying it's more like 450,000. The numbers can get squishy and it's kind of hard to count sometimes, but they didn't reach their million person goal. And if in fact that is what the driving force is, they want to get 1 million people out, you can then see why there might be a lot of pressure to bring more resources to bear to find more ways, more techniques to get more people out. So they have brought in the FBI. Early in the administration, they asked the FBI to join immigration task forces. They've brought in other law enforcement agencies within Department of Homeland Security, including Customs and Border Protection, CBP. Those are the guys that are at airports when you come back into the country and they check your passports. Those are also the men and women that secure our southern and northern borders. And they have jurisdiction in that context within 100 miles of a border. Notably, Minneapolis is not within 100 miles of an international border. So the way that they are able to operate is they've been cross-deputized, which law enforcement agencies are able to do. So you could take, for example, a Homeland Security investigations officer and cross-deputize him with FBI authorities and be able to do things on behalf of the FBI. So that's effectively what is happening in Minneapolis. Is they're brought in a number of extra law enforcement agencies in the federal government and have cross-deputized them to do these enforcement operations. The concern I have is that you're bringing in staff with very different training. The guys that do stuff on the border, they really are dealing with very difficult situations, cartels that are spotting them in the hills across the border with sniper rifles on them. They do very, very dangerous jobs. We send them overseas to train some of our partner countries in the war against terror so that they can learn how to protect their borders from terrorist crossing. Like they do some really cool stuff. I want them to do that job. They are not trained to be in a domestic civilian context. They don't know how to do local policing. They've never been trained on how you do a vehicle stop in the middle of an urban environment. That's just not their job. So we're asking people who have been trained with very important jobs over here to come do this other mission, and they don't have the proper training, and they quite possibly are being put into contexts that actually make their lives at risk and put the community's life at risk because they don't know how to properly respond.
I mean, that's important. It feels like it's a complete, big, huge stew of soup of all of the acronyms of people that are involved and everybody. It's like hard for us to even keep track of who has authority, who has jurisdiction, who has appropriate training for all of this. And I wanted to ask you, Jennie, I mean, when you oversee and you look at all the relationships and partnerships that the forum has, I mean, what is the relational responsibility between federal enforcement agencies and local police? I mean, because you have the local PD and then you have the local sheriff, the county sheriff's office. I mean, again, you're adding in, not only do you have a lot of federal layers, a lot of federal players, then you mix in the local enforcement agencies. Tell us a little bit about how that relationship is supposed to work.
Good question, and I always love listening to Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth, for orienting us on some very difficult things. Actually, that was very compact and amazing. Local law enforcement. So, I'm going to just go ahead and say that I am not happy with the lack of coordination, but this has been happening for a few administrations now. We've been trying to get the bubble in the center on making sure that our federal enforcement agents and our local law enforcement agents are really thinking about the impact of immigration enforcement at the local policing level. So basically, there's kind of three main reasons why there's a lot of reasons, but we're going to use three today of why we want to keep immigration enforcement a federal priority and how that helps local policing. So number one is, even though there's been this huge amount of money that's been spent on the OBBBA, did I get enough B's in there? The big, beautiful bill. Local law enforcement actually don't really see a lot of that money. And so they are very constrained resource-wise. They have not been able to meet their hiring quotas for decades, as we know. They haven't had the money. Even if they could find the people, they don't have the money to be able to have those resources. So resources are constrained. Number two is it's just not their goal. Their goal is to make sure that all of the people in their jurisdiction will feel safe to report crimes, will feel safe to partner with law enforcement to participate in investigations. So adding on immigration enforcement for local police means that it creates a lot of fear. And now we're seeing tension between neighbors as well, and newcomers, neighbors who are afraid on behalf of their newcomer neighbors, right? So it also creates a whole nother level of tension too. And then there's liability. So people have heard a little bit about the 287G agreements, right? These agreements that law enforcement can choose to participate with federal enforcement. And they would sign this agreement. They would get money supposedly from the bill. But what that would do is give access to the jails, to facilities. And what happens is when you give access, and this is an oversimplification, but I think for our purposes today, when you give access to your facilities and staff and all of those things, if something happens, which often it does, if somebody has been kept too long, detained too long, they've overstayed a deadline, or there's a quality control, the quality of someone's experience isn't good, then the local law enforcement is liable, not the federal agents that are partnered. And so there's a whole lot of reasons why law enforcement are very concerned. When we do this best, there is, good coordination that allows for, when federal agents reach out to local law enforcement and say, we have a priority, we are going to try to obtain this person because there is to Elizabeth's great point, there's a criminal violation, there's a safety need, and we are going to, try to apprehend this individual, and they let law enforcement know that that's going to happen. Then local law enforcement can be aware, they can help to police their community and make sure that others that they're there to assist, not with the apprehension, but with the community that's receiving the action. That's just not happening these days. So we don't see new resources. We see fear being increased, and we see this liability creeping in, and that's really creating a lot of tension between local law enforcement and these federal agents, and we see it really erupting in some of these key communities.
So tell me a little bit about that stress, because you mentioned this part of immigration law 287G, and I would love for you to maybe even just explain a little bit in layman's terms what that is, because that does dictate how the relationship works and how money flows and all of that between federal and local enforcement. But I also, once you kind of address that, I'd love for you to describe what we would probably call like blue on blue frustration.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about what is the most challenging thing about the way things are being implemented locally versus how it's really designed to work and how it should work, so that agencies, there's not this kind of blue on blue frustration.
Yeah. Elizabeth, did you want to take 287G? I can take blue on blue. I want to share that with you because there's a lot in both of those things, but you tell me what you want to take.
In the most simplistic way we can describe 287G, how would you describe that, Elizabeth?
Okay, so this actually goes back to delegation of authority, like that
Right.
cross-deputizing thing that I was mentioning. It authorizes basically the federal government to partner with a local or state organization to enforce in a limited way immigration authorities. So immigration law is federal law; it's not state law, and the way we what's the word I want to use? Exercise 287G is that it has to be in partnership. So the federal government can't come in and say, you will partner with us. It's a local agency who's willing to sign an MOA with the federal government. And it was actually a big initiative in 2017 when I joined the Trump administration. There was like a whole task force that was set up to go have conversations with local communities to get them to sign 287G agreements so that we could have better coordination between the two law enforcement entities. So let me give you an example of that working well. When you put an MOA together, both parties then know what their roles and responsibilities are. You're less likely to miscommunicate, who your points of contact are, to be able to make sure that if there is a tension between the forces, like who's going to resolve that. But the place where we really, really value this is in jails. So what often happens is you might have somebody that is unlawfully here, commit an actual crime that is prosecuted locally, under state law, and they go to prison. And then their prison sentence comes up and they need to be released. And because a state or a local jurisdiction does not have federal enforcement authority, it's not like they can take them and just immediately deport them. So the federal government could be paying attention, but they don't necessarily know everybody's release dates. And so one way to partner is for the state or the prison authority to inform the immigration authority that, hey, so-and-so is not documented or not supposed to be here. We're releasing them from prison. And then the responsibility falls to ERO to make sure that they go through their processes. Yes, this is somebody we've been looking for. Yes, we can put them into deportation proceedings. And rather than just releasing that person, they go out on the street and later ERO has to go find them, they just meet at the jail. Why is that safer? Because there's less weapons. Because in prisons, you're not allowed to have, the people that have the weapons are law enforcement, and there's nobody in the public in that prison setting. So you're just transferring custody from one entity to another. That's what you want to do for somebody that's committed a crime in the United States. You want that in prison swap. There are some communities who have decided they don't want to participate in that, and that is their constitutional right under the 10th Amendment. The state gets to kind of decide what level of engagement they want to have with the federal government. So we could argue about the policy vision there and whether that's good or bad, but it is the state's rights, at least my understanding of, I'm not a lawyer, but the other lawyers to explain to me, it is the state's decision point. It's not something the feds can force. Yeah. There are other ways that 287G can be used well beyond the jail context, and that might be another point of disagreement for some about whether that's wise to use local law enforcement in directly involved in enforcement of immigration law. You can imagine certain states are very happy to partner with the current federal government and immigration enforcement. Other states are not, and that's kind of set up a number of the tensions that we're seeing in the federal government, both in its enforcement actions in Minneapolis. This has been a key issue. They want better partnership, and then across the country in a number of different grant programs, they've added language to big blocks of money that go out for a whole host of purposes: education, homeland security, things that have nothing to do with immigration. And they've basically said that if you do not cooperate with 287G, then we're withholding our money. And a number of states have sued, and that's currently pending in a number of courts as to whether or not the government has the right to do that.
Yeah. So basically 287G, just in layman's terms, is this really just kind of an agreement between the local and federal enforcement agencies to say, all right, let's coordinate. And if there's coordination, then there's funding. And if there's funding, then we're going to operate in this way where we're going to try and collaborate together. And there are some states that are more agreeable to that collaboration than other states. And those are usually kind of divided along political lines. But Jennie, tell us a little bit about the stress that you're hearing. I mean, the forum has relationships with sheriffs and law enforcement agents all across the country as part of your effort to really uphold the law and really just constitutional rights and whatnot in the country. Talk to us about the blue on blue stress right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bree, one specification I would say for your wrap up on that is that 287G makes a partnership, right? Not a coordination. They should be coordinated anyway. Local and federal law enforcement should be talking. But the 287G agreement says we will work with you, partner our resources to remove, right? To work on removals with you. So that's the difference. Coordination is super important. And that's what I would say about the kind of blue on blue problem that you're asking about. So as Elizabeth said, look, we are moving a lot of agents from different jurisdictions and with different skill sets into the interior of our country, into our neighborhoods and communities in a way that is not the right local policing types of trainings and abilities, right? They haven't been trained to go door to door in a residential community with a school zone at the end of the block kind of thing, right? And so those types of things are a problem. There's also just this amped up hiring thing that we're all very aware of, and the training has been reduced. There is still training happening with the new ICE agents who are coming in, but from what I've heard from friends who helped to run ERO not long ago, right, Elizabeth, some of the people in your colleagues and friends in your world, that there's a lot less, dozens and dozens of hours of less training with the new hires. So we've got all this amped up new hiring, less training, agencies redesignated from jurisdictions and tasks that are not, ready to meet kind of our local soft communities in the same way. And because of this surge, this clash is really unprecedented, and this surge is causing a lot of tension. And there's what I'm hearing from chiefs and sheriffs in our law enforcement immigration task force, which is about 160 across the country. A lot of red and purple places, actually pretty moderate and conservative zones, that they're having no coordination. They're not hearing anything, that people are just sweeping into neighborhoods without even giving them a heads up. And then the fallout is happening. So then that community member calls and says, somebody with a badge is at my door And I don't know if I can trust them. And so the local police are flat-footed, right? And they're not able to understand. At best, they're caught flat-footed. At worst, what we're seeing is they have to deal with a situation, right? An escalation or a situation. And so it's really frustrating. And I mean, states like North Carolina, other places where there's been lots of coordination in the past with federal and local law enforcement, they're feeling literally zero in the last kind of 12 months. And they're extremely frustrated and nervous. And they've been trying to attend roundtables and have listening sessions. And they're trying so hard to say, we want to be here. We want to be ready to help our community in the midst of this moment. Yes, you have your federal jurisdiction. And that's something we should say. Just because a state doesn't sign a 287G or a locality doesn't sign a 287G, or the state makes it illegal, which I see here in the chat, that does not mean federal law enforcement cannot carry out their job within the state. It means that the local police will not partner with, and I see this comment and I hear that there's problems there and there's overreach, and I hear that. I haven't heard that myself, but I definitely respect that comment. But I would just say that this clash is happening because of lack of coordination from what I'm hearing from local police.
So you mentioned training a little bit. Elizabeth, what are ICE agents? What is their training, and what has it been reduced to? What do we know about the kind of expedited hiring and the expedited training process that people have been going through? What do you know?
So ICE agents, like every federal law enforcement officer, go to training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, FLETC. It's in Georgia. Their training is supposed to include immigration law, federal criminal law, arrest and detention procedures, firearms and use of force training, and constitutional law and civil rights basics. What we have heard is that also, I should say, also they do a lot of Spanish language training. What we have heard is that they've cut the Spanish language training. They've cut a lot of the constitutional law, civil rights training. And they've shortened a number of other things that, you know, I'm always for government could probably be more efficient at things. It's when I talk to people who have gone through FLETC, who have worked at ERO or HSI, they are alarmed. They are alarmed from two perspectives. They're alarmed that we're putting people on the streets to do a job that they haven't been trained to do, so that they might not actually be that effective at the job. But they're also putting those people, they're putting, when you're not trained, you're putting that person's life at risk. So they're very concerned from a workforce perspective that this, even if you're a new person, that's untrained, you could cause somebody else to lose their life in the workforce because you do the wrong action when you're doing an operation, right? So it's not just that they're worried about the new people's lives, they're worried about the veterans' lives, because anytime you put somebody with not enough training on a team, it makes the whole team weaker. So that's one thing that I'm hearing. And obviously we've had this moment of two people being killed, two U.S. citizens being killed. There were 3 shootings within 3 weeks, and two of those shootings were not by ICE, by the way. It was CBP. Border Patrol. So these were people that are not used to operating in urban environments with U.S. citizens. They're used to very, very different operational environments. And most of what the concern that has been raised is that we seem to both have a training issue, but also a culture issue, which are, kind of tied. Like you get indoctrinated into a culture through your training, but they're very concerned that we are putting a CBP who has not gone through the same types of training, especially around maybe some of their use of force policy is different. Their civil rights policies are different. What you actually you might not know this, but when you're within 100 miles of the border, you actually have less rights. You have fewer rights when you're entering a port of entry than at any other time as an American citizen. So we're taking people who are used to operating under one set of rules and putting them in a different context, and they don't know because it's not like they pause and go, well, let me retrain you. Let me take you off of the border, send you to Georgia to go through the FLETC training for immigration enforcement, and then deploy you to Minneapolis. No, they're just taking people and deploying them. So, if you do that with a small group of people and they're embedded with a large group of people who know what's happening, they are law enforcement professionals. They can figure it out. The problem is, like, we've added, basically doubled the ICE workforce in the last 8 months. And then we're adding a whole bunch of other law enforcement entities that aren't used to using the ICE authorities. And those two things combined, along with a top-down messaging coming from the White House itself, that they should be as aggressive as possible. All of those things are like creating this perfect storm, where you have law enforcement officers who have clearly violated their use of force policy. They have violated, like, the courts, and this is not a partisan thing, I just want to be really clear. The courts are saying that there are a number of ways that all of these law enforcement officers are violating U.S. citizens' constitutional rights. And I should also, even as I say that, I want to point out that under U.S. law, the constitutional rights apply to everybody who is standing inside the United States. Mm-hmm. So even if you are not a U.S. citizen, whether you are documented or undocumented, you still have First Amendment, you still have rights. You have First Amendment rights, you have Fourth Amendment rights. Like those, the law enforcement officers cannot violate those rights regardless of your legal status. And so when you have multiple courts saying, stop it, you guys are like, this isn't this isn't a gray area here. This isn't a difference of opinion here. You guys are blatantly violating the Constitution. That tells me something has gone really wrong with this workforce, and I would love for them to just stand down and retool, because I am, my worry is that they have gone so far that there's going to be such a massive backlash, which, by the way, I think is deserved. I'm not trying to justify the abuses here, but what we tend to do as a country is we swing so far back that I'm worried that we're going to lose really important national security tools that we need to keep our country safe. Their abuse is leading to possibly the downfall of a very important agency and set of tools.
I think that's really important to point out, because it's for those who are in the national security space, for those who are upholding and care about local law enforcement and really just law and order and law-abiding citizens and law enforcement, right? I don't hear those reasonable voices calling for an abolishing of ICE. What I hear is them saying we need reforms of ICE. So we don't want to lose enforcement of laws. We need enforcement of immigration laws, but it seems like there has been a reconfiguration and a reprioritization of things that are really violating some of the laws and order that have been put in place to help them be effective. So we would like enforcement to go in like with a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer, right? And that's part of what we're afraid about. Jennie, I'd love for you to also just share a little bit of your thoughts on that as well, especially with some of what we're seeing in communities and what we definitely saw in LA and with the Supreme Court upholding some of the racial profiling and whatnot. Can you talk to us a little bit about, and maybe even Elizabeth, you can join in here, how do you even, if you're very practically speaking, if you're in a local community and you have enforcement happening in your, how do you engage with enforcement that has these kinds of training, hiring, tooling challenges? How are we supposed to engage with enforcement?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. I wanted to say, right before we jump into that, I just wanted to say that on that point, you were just making, Bree and Elizabeth, about reforms, how not to lose what's really key in our national security efforts and our enforcement efforts. The Council on National Security and Immigration, which Elizabeth's a part of, and many other wonderful leaders, cnsiusa.org is the website, put out recommendations for accountability and updates, right? So it's such a good point. We want to make sure that we have accountability, that there are updates, that we can even put folks in check, but not to get rid of the really important practices that we've put in place post 9/11 and all of the wonderful things that we've honed to keep our nation secure. So I just wanted to say that if you want to go to that
Yeah.
website, there's a really great release from last week that I think is really helpful, and it's a bunch of leaders. What we can do, well, this is a really hard thing because I think we see with both of the fatal shootings in the last couple of weeks that this is very different than I think any of us would have approached this moment before. So I don't know about you all. I read the letters from the Birmingham jail. I learned from incredible Christian women and men who were involved in many types of civil rights movement. Absolutely, without batting an eye, would have jumped up to stand arm in arm alongside vulnerable people who are also, fighting for their own individual rights. And I think it's rocked our community. I would say, I know all of us are women of welcome ourselves here. So I also come from this community myself, and I would just say, as an individual Christian woman in this moment, I think this has been the hardest question for me: is how would I meet this moment? To Elizabeth's good, wonderful point and true point, we do see the courts continuing to uphold the fact that the Constitution protects all of us. What we don't see happening is the fact that putting yourself into the middle of an enforcement moment. We don't see that being a takeaway from this. So I think that's where I would ask people to think about, to stand up, to stand alongside, to be involved in peaceful protests if they even feel called, or to just check on their neighbors, to continue to be supportive. But anytime you see enforcement happening in this moment, what we don't want to ask people to do is to sort of jump into the middle of that enforcement moment, given what we've just talked about here. We don't necessarily know that the training is something that we can rely on in this moment. We don't know that there's coordination in these moments. So I think I would say continue to be in prayer, continue to look out for your neighbors, continue to stand up for your values and your beliefs. I absolutely believe that this is for such a time as this. These are those moments when we do that. But have talked to a lot of folks from ICE and ICE ERO and others that would say in this moment, and in all moments, really, if you see an apprehension happening at that exact moment, you should not jump into that moment and get in the way of officers in an enforcement moment. It is heightened. It doesn't allow for de-escalation, and it also could cause errors, right? It's better to allow the courts, the Constitution, the courts, and rule of law, which I know many of us have felt that there's a softening there. And so I understand that core feeling, but to allow for the process to pan out and to just look out for the vulnerable people that are on the fringes of that moment. I saw somebody coming to my neighbor's door, kind of getting my body into the middle of that. Instead, what I did was work on the fringes with law enforcement to ask if I could be helpful for the children. Is there anyone I could call? Could I set up anything on the fringes? But I allowed for enforcement to happen. So, honestly, Bree, that's my reaction as just an individual woman in this moment. That's a Christian that feels the call to care about my neighbors, but also sort of seeing this moment so that we can work towards de-escalation and coordination and reforms, as Elizabeth talked about, which we think is potentially maybe happening on the ground a little bit in Minnesota. We need to find ways to work for de-escalation together.
Yeah. Elizabeth, what would you want to add to that? I mean, my biggest takeaway from all of that is that while we may not agree with the enforcement that is happening in every single situation, we want enforcement overall in general to happen. But when we are seeing enforcement happening in that moment, to not interfere with enforcement, but to responsibly come alongside and video and report and take notes and ask, as Jennie was just saying, how can you be helpful in that moment? Because there is a danger in the lack of training and the lack of coordination. And so we we want to be mindful and careful about that. And we also want to stand with our immigrant neighbors. So what would you add to that, Elizabeth? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, just two things, and this is a yes and to everything Jennie said, which I wholeheartedly agree. Um, it is illegal for any of us to interfere with any sort of law enforcement action. So that's true in all circumstances. What was happening on the ground in Minneapolis, I would suggest, was not interfering, but they were trying to exercise this. A number of groups have been training people on how to take video for accountability purposes, and clearly these officers were annoyed by that. There were people using whistles, people taunting them, and because these folks are not trained well and probably are at a breaking point themselves personally, these tragedies came about, and so just because you have the First Amendment right, and you do, I went and checked the case law. It is not illegal to be a jerk to a law enforcement officer. The courts have actually upheld this. You can taunt, you can say all the things. The burden is on the state to have restraint, not on the citizen. But this is a moment of wisdom. We have seen through countless examples that the state is not restrained right now. And so wisdom would dictate, I'm not saying you give in to them, but I am saying be wise about how you're using your voice and the manner in which you're doing it. As believers, we are called, that we are told that the means matter too. So we shouldn't be taunting and being unkind. You can hold people accountable without being a jerk. So there's a couple of pieces here. I think as believers, we can use our voice in respectful ways that is maybe different than how other people are protesting. And I think that matters. I think sometimes the voices that actually need to hear that are more open to hearing our concerns if we're not jerks about it. So the way in which we communicate our concerns really does matter. And yes, I'm with where both of you are right now. I would exercise caution around any federal law enforcement activity, even if you're doing that with, just to document it, and you are lawfully allowed to do that. This is a group of people that are demonstrating that they are not making wise decisions right now, and you need to take that into consideration. And then there's another piece that we all should be doing. We should be reaching out to our members of Congress. We should be reaching out to our state and local officials and telling them our concerns and asking them to do what they can in their roles and responsibilities to hold the federal government accountable for these breaches of the rule of law. So that is a very responsible way that we can exercise what our duty as citizens to hold the government accountable.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, Elizabeth. And I would just say that as a parting thought, that there are many many elected officials right now are working really hard on a bill or a set of bills. There's a lot of thinking right now and drafting going on. And I think lifting our voices, it's a perfect moment to do that. And to say we'd love a bipartisan, bicameral solution that does keep us all safer.
So let me ask this, and we're going to wrap up here in the next, 5 minutes here. One of the things that we continue to hear is, and that we're seeing is that a lot of this heightened and advanced enforcement is happening in states that are more democratic or would be labeled sanctuary cities. And so there's this perception that the enforcement is needed and warranted because these are, quote, sanctuary cities. And so when we're seeing this enforcement, this is actually either it's a good thing or it's because these cities have really haven't been playing fair ball all along, right? And so I think one of the questions that we should probably just address, since we're seeing very targeted, heightened enforcement in blue cities, right, is really kind of clearing the air about what is technically like a sanctuary city. What does that actually mean? And What is the does the data right now actually support the level of and the quality of apprehensions and detainment that is happening in this moment? So
Mm-hmm.
who wants to take that first one on sanctuary cities?
I can take the definition and then you take the
Okay.
quality piece, Elizabeth, but you owe me. um, there is no definition of sanctuary city. That's the hard and fast. So that's why the talking points can be used in lots of directions, and that's why we can feel this whiplash, and it can be used politically and so much so many annoying things. Okay, what it's not and what it is. Sanctuary city is not lawlessness, right? It doesn't mean that crime is legal, period. However, the wiggle room on this is, as Elizabeth was stating earlier, the use of the word criminal is what's happening here. So what it means is, for the reasons I listed earlier, law enforcement are not mandated to participate in enforcement, and usually it's because of the resources, the fear being an antithesis of a local policing goal, the liability of local facilities being used, all those things I named earlier. Because of those reasons, often an entity will say we are a sanctuary city and we're not going to participate with this, right? It does not mean, I'll say it one more time, that crime is legal. Okay. That does not mean that anyone is going to get away with any kind of violent crime, with major theft, any of those things, right? It just means that they're not going to participate in those ways. And that's been an official stance, right?
And people would say that people's argument about that, Jenny, is that it makes those cities more lenient on enforcement, and it also creates a safe haven for um, immigrants who do have criminal records or do commit crimes. What would you say
Sure.
to that?
Sure. I would say that's not true. I would say that what it allows for is this parceling of the term criminal, right? So what it allows for is that those that do create true capital criminal offenses will still be prosecuted, right? Those who their only violation might be a civil violation, to Elizabeth's point, that is an immigration violation. It separates that group of people, right, from one another, and it makes a designation there. That's what it does. Now, do I think that we should have sanctuary cities? Actually, I don't actually think it's super helpful, to be honest, because what it does is create exactly what we're going through right here and now, is a tug of war between state and federal entities, and an opportunity for our politicians to be able to use this as a political football, right? So what I think is not helpful is leaning into it. So I don't think, even as an immigrant and refugee advocate, I wouldn't say, let's just all sign up for sanctuary cities. In fact, I've always kind of been critical because I don't think it sets us up for this. I understand where it comes from. I applaud where it comes from, because it's acknowledging that the system is broken. It's acknowledging that immigration law needs to be overhauled, and that there are overstays of visa, or people have entered unlawfully, but yet they don't pose a threat to our society, right? A physical threat to our society. They're attempting to try to do that by whatever power they have. So I do think it kind of comes from a good place, but I don't think it perpetuates the changes that we need to see. So I hope that's helpful. It's incredibly fraught. No matter what you click on social media, you're going to hear all this or all that on sanctuary cities, right? This is the only way that we protect people, or this is harboring fugitives, right? And neither are true. And really what we need to do is honestly to do what I work on day in and day out, which is to try to have an overhaul of our broken immigration system. And that's the truth about all of this. If we were able to figure out how to undo some of the damage of the last 40 years of having a broken immigration system and look forward to what immigration should look like into our future, then there would a lot of these detaining and deporting of individuals, pulling families apart, decimating communities, and hurting the workforce wouldn't be possible, because we would have fixed those problems.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Elizabeth?
Jennie did awesome at that. I was taking notes because that was probably the best explanation I've seen. The only thing I just to add on to the answer the question that you also asked, Bree, about is there a difference in terms of like is there a security reason why you need to target these cities? The answer is no. In fact, it might actually be disproportionate, especially the amount of deployed people that we've seen in Minneapolis for such a small, like Minneapolis is a small city. It's actually insane that just if you were to look at the United States and try to plan out where you want to put resources, it's insane that they put this many people in Minneapolis. It's very clearly designed to intimidate, to send a political, try to politically coded messages to their base, and to intimidate and rile up the other. Like it's not for an operational reason is maybe the way to frame it. And we know because they've been really transparent, so much so that there are now court cases that states are bringing against the administration that they are doing these enforcements as political retribution, which is against the law. And they have so many examples of both the president and some of his affiliates talking about this in a political context that a lot of lawyers are like, yeah, they might actually be able to win these cases because they're not hiding the fact that the reason they're doing this is not because there's a particular concerning thing happening in these blue cities. It's all political. So that's it's another great place for the courts to help clarify. And but in the meantime, yes, unfortunately, blue cities like Denver, where I am, are likely to see some of these tactics very soon.
So, okay. So everybody here in the Women of Welcome community, we, our bottom line, if you're new here, if you're just watching, is safe and secure borders, thorough vetting, and the humane treatment of people who we believe are made in the image and likeness of God. I mean, that's the bottom line. No one in our spheres with any kind of credibility or experience is in support of lawlessness or, in fact, it's quite the opposite. We want to uphold, we want to encourage, and we want to equip law enforcement to do their job and to uphold the law. So one of the things that we talked about earlier was just kind of this blue on blue stress. And that I want to remind us that it does not have to be this way. It does not have to be, and it shouldn't be this way. It wasn't designed to function like this operationally, logistically, personally, nationally. It was not designed to be this way. And so it doesn't have to be this way. One of the things is bringing it from out of the national 100,000 foot level and just trying to bring it to your local level. We talked about the blue on blue stress. I can imagine, and I know that we have heard, and Jennie, you and Elizabeth both hear from leaders in law enforcement all the time, how difficult that this has made their job, and that the everyday job that they have is to keep their local communities safe. And so some people will say, well, just comply. And other people will say, well, no, you got to do it in a dignified way. Enforcement has to be dignified, and enforcement has to also follow the law. They want other people to follow law. So there's just so much conversation swirling. And the question that I have is, what do local authorities, local law enforcement leaders need from citizens in their communities? This is the last question I'll ask. What are you hearing that they need? And what do you know is important for them to hear from local citizens?
You want to go first, Elizabeth? Okay, I would just say they need us to advocate. For sure, they are trying really hard to do what they can within their power. I see this important chat from someone in Minnesota saying that they're tired. They joined the prayer gathering and saw that police were tired and stressed. That is exactly what we're hearing.
Advocate for what, though? You mentioned like
advocating for better coordination and for reforms of what it can, what these enforcement surges can look like in a local community and how they should be coordinated with local law enforcement, right? It is in that recommendation that I pointed people to. There's also lots of stuff on the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force website that I think is really helpful. So advocate for those things, better coordination. And then also I would say, and just really, we talked about this earlier, it's the more nuanced stuff. Like, what are those practices of how you show up? I think showing up in a way that is looking to help keep things safe in the moment when sort of something's going down, but also help to, many of them care very much about what's left behind after there's something. So are there children left behind? Is there something else that really needs attendance? I've heard that a lot. Local law enforcement, they do so many things. They don't just show up for, there's a claim and I'm just showing up to see to the violent moment, take down the record or apprehend somebody and walk away. They do everything. I mean, there's such a connector between community service and neighbors and all kinds of social service and other types of systems that work together. So I would say really presenting yourself in a way when it feels like it's the right thing to do or it's safe in that moment. I think to also partner alongside them and say, hey, can I be helpful after you've seen a situation clear or whatever that looks like. I would say that they would think that that's tremendous. The other thing is honestly the 287G agreement. Pushing folks to sign the 287G agreement. A lot of us have a really powerful voice in that because whether the voters are your boss, so sheriff and chief and sheriff have different bosses, right? Whether the mayor's your boss or the voters are your boss, the voters are the mayor's boss as well. And so as we tell our local folks, hey, we don't want to see our law enforcement have to sign or adhere to a 287G agreement. That's also a way that you can advocate if that's how you feel.
Yeah. I mean, I think just to understand a little bit more about 287G and the stress and the pressure that some of these local leaders could be feeling to sign something like that further stresses the local resources and the and staffing and margin that they have. Coordination can still happen and should still happen, but it doesn't have to be the forced kind of situation through pressure points and political pressure of the 287G agreement. So what I'm hearing is advocacy. I'm also hearing if you're on site, you're trying to be helpful. You're not trying to, be an agitator in any way. You're trying to be a helpful citizen who's bearing witness in that regard. I think on the very practical level, there are a lot of women in your city who either serve or are married to those in law enforcement. So even just having a very compassionate and curious ear and heart towards those who are in the law enforcement community is really important. I mean, it's a very difficult job in and of itself. And then you add this layer of complexity on and the decisions that have to be made. It does take a high level of compassion and also just curiosity to lean in and say, what does your family need? How can I support you? So yes, the advocacy is incredibly important. I think as Jennie mentioned, we're in this moment where the advocacy has a moment of inflection because our elected officials want to know how much we actually care about this. And so this is a moment for us. But I also think on the very practical level, we can be reaching out to individuals that we know that are in law enforcement and loving on them in ways, telling them that we can and will be praying for them and asking them what they need in that regard. Sometimes that could just be like, maybe your church sponsors some kind of appreciation lunch or something like that really signals, hey, we're behind you in making these difficult decisions, especially when law enforcement is doing it well. I mean, it's one thing when you see really egregious, unconstitutional or abuses or overreach in the enforcement area, but when you see law enforcement doing a good job and striving to do a good job, I think we also have to encourage and applaud that and support them. So Elizabeth, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Thank them when you see them.
Yeah.
They do a ton of work that keep us safe, and we almost never know about it. And it's actually been the COVID in post-COVID period took a huge toll on local law enforcement. So it's just been one thing after another for law enforcement in general in this country. So I love all of the recommendations you guys had. Whatever we can do, love your law enforcement neighbor, right? They are really key glue to our communities that we often forget about.
Yeah. Jenny, if you could put in the websites that you mentioned into the comments there, that would be great. And then I'm just going to pray for us to close our time together. So let's just do that together. Heavenly Father, we are deeply grateful to live in this country where we do have freedoms and we do have agency, Lord, and yet everything feels pretty chaotic right now. And while we know that things have to be righted and courses have to be taken in order to provide security, we want it to be done in humane ways that really seek mercy and do justice. And we want to acknowledge what is hard, and we want to lament and hold to account that is overreach and abuse. And we want to acknowledge those things, be fair and transparent about those things, Lord, because those things are evil, Lord. And we want to call evil what it is. But then we also want to call out what is good, Lord. And so many people work so tirelessly to keep us safe. People we don't even know, people we don't even see. And in this really moment of sheer chaos in the enforcement agency, we pray for discernment. We pray for wisdom. We pray for really good leaders to rise to the top. We pray for good everyday working the streets, manning traffic, all of those public servants who signed up because they want goodness to happen and to flourish. We ask that you would protect them and keep them safe and give them courage and boldness in the face of some of this chaotic and sometimes very evil activities that are happening in the country. So we just ask for us to be wise and discerning, and that you provide protection and wisdom and correction where it is needed. Lord, help us. Have mercy on us. Help us, Lord. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, ladies, thank you for joining me. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.